Very warm welcome to those who are joining us online today for an event within the IOER Forum series that we hold in this autumn on the topic of sustainable public procurement. And this is a science talk format in which we we'll have two presentations today, one by Dr. Stephen Parker and one from Dr. John Morris from IOER. My name is Artem Korzeniewicz. I will be moderating this talk today. And we will start with the presentation of Stephen Parker. I will just say briefly a few words about the presenter. Dr. Stephen Parker is a lecturer in public management in the Open University Business School in Milton Keynes, UK. I learned that Milton Keynes is a very interesting city itself. It's a planned town built to in the 60s to reduce the population pressure on London. So they have kind of a history of dealing with sustainability issues from the very beginning in this respect. And Dr. Stephen Parker previously was employed in local government as social worker and manager, and he did his dissertation at University of Bristol, and he's worked as a researcher in local government and public services. He published his work in local journals like Local Government Studies, Public Management Review, Public Money and Management, so all field journals in this research field. And his recent research is on the topic of public entrepreneurship and public value. And he'll be talking to us today about the practice of sustainable public procurement in the UK. And I will be happy to hand over to Dr. Parker, and the floor is yours.
Well, thanks very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And it's great to share this research. I've called the presentation Public Procurement in England, a regional perspective. And I'll explain the rationale for that in a minute. But before I just move to that, just a bit, as was just said, my background is local government, and I was a practitioner for 20 years. So, as well as doing this recent research on public procurement, focused on local government, I've always had a very, I suppose, for want of a better term, an intimate relationship with procurement processes. I've, commissioned, provided to deliver services. I've run tender panels. I've always been quite interested in the role of procurement and the relationship with the state and the connections between them. So this is, quite a long-standing interest, especially as a social worker. I've seen the interface of many different types of services: public, private, non-profit, voluntary sector, as we call it. So it's something that has always interested me. So this has quite a long-standing interest. I'll talk about this a bit more, but I suppose one of the motivations for doing this research was I work with a professor at Durham University, Joyce Liddell, who may well join us in a little while. And Joyce and myself are very interested in what we always call sometimes the messiness of English governance. There are many sort of levels of governance. There's been very sort of many reviews. There's devolution issues. So it's sometimes very difficult to understand the complexity of different things that are going on within England. So we wanted to try and have a first attempt, and this, as far as I know, is the first time people have really tried to do this, try in some way put a little bit of a ring around some of the practices that are going on in public procurement, particularly from a local government and regional perspective. If you have any questions, do please stop me and buy one, as they say in the olden days, when you bought an ice cream in the street. So do ask me. I'm happy for you to ask for any clarifications. So I thought it'd be very good just to sort of start with, we all know this, but public procurement is defined as the purchase of goods, services and works by governments and state-owned enterprises. And this is typically undertaken through public contracts. Here, for example, I've cited the old procurement contract regulations 2015. And there are a broad range of procurement activity across construction, transportation, social care. We have a new procurement regime in England now called it's got the Public Procurement Act, which is very much a post-Brexit act. So I may touch on that. But one of the things that I think is really interesting about procurement that I don't think is really brought out very strongly in a lot of the research that I see in the public management field is that it's actually quite a very ethically rich area. And one of the key terms that you've probably seen in the space is about social value and about the relationship between public procurement and social value. So I think that's interesting. And one of the things that I noticed is that because public procurement can include people services, social care, services that people experience, perhaps as service users, but also about the purchase of goods and also works, for example, let's say the maintenance of a road. I think that people have really sort of under researched, what these different levels of value mean within this space. But we'll touch on that in a little bit. So I'm a public management scholar. So I tend to work within these sort of theories: public value, leadership of place, boundary spanning, about maybe how different actors move across different types of settings, collaboration, and so on. So one of the things that I've noticed in the public procurement literature in my own field of public management, that it really didn't seem to sort of engage with a lot of these theories. In fact, there's quite a sort of, I would argue, quite a perspective on the research of procurement, in that it very much seems to sort of focus on maybe its start in the 1980s. Sometimes it almost talks as if public procurement was almost a product of something that came out of neoliberalism. But from where I stand, I think public procurement has the state procuring has a very, very long background. Back to military procurement hundreds of years ago. In England, we had things such as the Poor Law in Victorian times, and about how different parishes collaborated together to purchase services for the poor and so on. So I would say that although it may not have been called procurement then, this is a very long-standing field. So what we wanted to do in our research was really try and understand what sort of procurement activities were going on within some English regions to try and get an understanding of some theories that might fit to that, which in future might help researching this in future research. And place, for example, is very important at the moment in England. We have the current devolution agenda. There's talk about sort of integrating different government organisations to make them sort of smarter and leaner, because, as I was saying earlier, there are many different levels and organisations and different types of councils in England. And this notion of the levels and organisations is really very underexplored. And although we only focus on the the regions, I'll show you the regions in a minute. I think there is a lot of opportunity to try and get a much better understanding of the different scales of public procurement across a nation state at different levels and in different spheres and so on. In terms of the research, I find that it at the moment is focused very much on green and sustainable procurement, very relevant to your interests, and social value, which is all very interesting and relevant and timely. But I do see, from my perspective, sometimes a lack of research on other areas such as collaboration and the role of institutions, boundary spanning, boundary objects in the procurement literature. I think there is a lot of gaps in the research there. So in this paper, we attempt to theorize some of this mess, as it were, as organizations, collaborations, and mechanisms. So I won't go through this in detail because I'm sure that you're aware of the issues, but we have different policy legacies linking to procurement. Different pieces of policy and legislation which affect that. That systems do not always dovetail together globally with different sort of traditions, and a lack of information. When I was writing my paper, I was trying to get some data, and it'd be very difficult to get comparative data. As you might imagine, there's a lot of focus in the literature about sort of the need for trust and relationship building, particularly when different purchasers want to join together to purchase and get a better deal and so on. So, currently, some perspectives which get integrated in the literature a lot are things like modern slavery, sustainability, and social value. I think that, and green procurement. I think these are maybe the main, from where I stand, the main foci on public procurement. And lastly, discussion about streamlining public procurement. For example, we have a new Public Procurement Act in England, but to what degree that will actually streamline processes is a new issue. I mean, it only came live quite recently. So these are our questions, or our question, sorry. What variations currently exist in local government procurement landscapes, platforms and priorities within and between English regions? And we looked at three areas of regions, three regions of England: the northeast of England and the East Midlands and London. The reason being that my colleague Joyce is an expert on the northeast. I know a lot about the East Midlands. I worked here as a practitioner and a policy officer here. We picked London because one thing that we want to explore is whether megacities and big urban conurbations maybe have more of a centralisation of procurement. I think that's a really interesting question, to see whether bigger cities have more streamlined procurement processes. I'll report on that in a bit. And lastly, one of the limitations that we found and struggled with is that it is a very technical area, and it took us a lot of work and analysis to actually understand what is going on in this space, and therefore we were told that our work was quite descriptive at times. But there are so many technical terms and legal terms that it is quite difficult to discuss what is going on without being quite descriptive. And luckily, we had support from a chief procurement officer and a contract solicitor who helped us with some of that. And these are the documents we looked at. We looked at about 27 documents in 3 areas of England. So that's the beginning. So I want to get on to the main part of the presentation now. So an overview of the findings. I'll talk about these in detail one by one, but one is about a type of organisation we found, about how local government organisations in the regions have to reach out from their own regions to purchase, and we've also developed a small typology. I'm going to just show you this diagram before we go any further, because I just want to sort of show you the regions, if that helps you, and then I'll slip back to my. This is England, obviously, and I'll tell you what these organisations are in a minute. But just so that you know that we did our research ignore the things on the right at the minute, in the northeast at the top, in the East Midlands in the centre, and then London. So one of the things that we found in our research is that there is quite a mess of organisations within this, as you would imagine. We get the individual local government organisations. We get sort of some quasi-regional approaches. We get organisations in different parts of the country that are part of this space at different scale. Again, I think that's a piece of future research that we need to do. One of the things that really interested, though, in our first sort of key finding is that we have something in England called regional purchasing bodies. So let me just tell you about these, and this might help. So in England, we have three regional purchasing bodies in 3 areas of England. We have, in the northeast of England, we have what's called NEPO, which is the Northeast East Procurement Organisation. And we have WIPO, which is the Yorkshire Procurement Organisation. And then we have ESPO, which is the Eastern Shires Procurement Organisation. So in the past, there used to be 5 organisations. That one of them failed, and one of them is integrated, I think, with the East Midlands. What is interesting about this is that these three, although England is much bigger than this, these 3 regional public procurement organisations supply to the rest of England, and similar organisations do not exist in other parts of England. Now, that is an interesting question, because it begs you to think, why would you have regional procurement organisations in only some regions and not others? And I think this is where maybe some historical, these are run and have been initiated by local government organisations coming together who have been motivated to build their own procurement organisations. So they tend to be run by local government anchor institutions in partnership settings. But it's interesting that we do not have them in other parts of England. And I'd say that a particularly interesting question that I found was why there is not a procurement organisation like this in London. I was expecting to find some sort of centralisation organisation in a megacity that might have this sort of overview. And yet London itself purchases from other places as well, but it purchases from these 3 organisations. So that is an interesting question or finding, I think, and something that would be worthy of further exploration about why they exist in some areas than others. Do stop me if I confuse. The other thing, second thing that I found was about how within the strategies that the regions, right? So I looked at strategies, as I say, in the Northeast, in York, in East Midlands, and in London. They very much aspire to what's the word? Create local social value. So the strategies very much talk about how they are spending so much within the local area. So, for example, Durham, for example, said that it spends 68% of its spend is within the northeast area, and London Borough of Haringey, which is a borough in the north of London, said that 25% of contracts within its postcode. What they're doing is what they're trying to do there is they're trying to purchase locally so that they can improve local social value. A couple of things about that. This seems to be, from where I stand, it can be sometimes be the specialism of a specific local organisations. Like, for example, Durham has got a very good reputation for having a good strategy on local social value, and so is local Borough of Haringey. And from what I've seen, this can often be led by maybe key individuals within that space, key chief procurement officers who are particularly motivated to that. But you may sort of not see as much of that local social value within other areas where you get that lack of motion. So I think it is dependent on players who are interested in this field. There is also a tension, I would argue, and this is why I put proximity as trying to purchase locally and reaching out. There is a tension, I would say, with the regions that I looked at, because they're all trying to balance what we call best value and social value. So even though they're trying to promote local social value, they may need to sort of purchase outside of their region to meet best value obligations and expectations. or perhaps there may not be a service or a product or whatever that's available in that area. But that I would argue that there is a tension between best value and local social value. And I just wanted to say as well about this proximity thing is that you notice when I was reading the strategies is that also some smaller local government organizations group together. I'm sure you've seen this in Germany as well, but they do this because they want to get a better, because they want to get a better deal, but secondly, because they think it will be strategically better for the local community, particularly when there's a border between, for example, here where I live in Leicester. Leicester is a separate local authority to Leicestershire. I know, which sounds odd. So Leicester and Leicestershire work very close together because of their proximity. So some of these relationships are based on, many of them I would argue are based on long-standing relationships that have been going on for many decades. But you may not always see that in other groupings. So, for example, in London, I was interested. I found quite a lot of fragmentation in London. I was thinking that in London, the boroughs of London would perhaps come together and jointly procure, and they do in some areas. For example, some parts of London procure waste and so on, but provision. But on the other side of the coin, they struggle to come together, for example, to buy social care. You know, that rather than coming together in a grouping, they would procure social care separately. And reasons for that might include the complexity of trying to unpick long-standing contracts and arrangements within their own borough. But secondly, in that London itself has different political makeups between sort of different political parties, that there can be sort of tension from politicians about not wanting to work with a neighbour from a different political party. Sorry, this is my last finding. Excuse us, I'll just find my notes. But I thought I had on my page, but this is what I wanted to call as my typology. So this, I think, would be useful to see what you think of it. But when we wrote this paper, we feeling there was not really a typology that people might start to use to understand procurement in local government regions. So what we have done, we've put together this typology, which we think is helpful for trying to get an understanding of, you know, the different spheres of what's going on. So within local regions, we see firstly procurement organizations. Ones that I've mentioned, these are the institutions that exist within the space or connected to the space. No, so we have the local government organizations of different sizes. We have the regional purchasing-based organizations I mentioned earlier, or not. As I said, some of them don't have them. But there is also an interplay with some central providers as well, in terms of when they reach out more broadly. But we see some really interesting types of institution. I think more work is needed, personally, on procurement, the sort of procurement institutions in that space, the types of institutions and their functions. So I think that's one thing that could benefit from future research. Secondly, our second part of the typology is what we call procurement collaborations. And within the frameworks, within the strategies that we read, we saw many words such as consortia, combination, shared, combined. There is obviously an aspiration within local government procurement to come together to try and deal with some of these issues. Perhaps by putting together sort of contractual framework agreements between the different parties. So I think there's some really interesting research there to be undertaken on collaboration. And in my area of public management, I don't see a lot of that. I would argue that public procurement is not as researched as it should be. And lastly, in my typology, one of the things that I found interesting, and again, these were mentioned within the strategies, is reference to many different sort of technical terms that are used within the procurement space. You probably have similar terms yourself. Terms such as joint procurement, shared services, framework agreements, dynamic purchasing systems. These are almost sort of contractual tools that act as the focus, the procurement activity. I think these personally play a really interesting role within collaboration. They, to me, seem to act like a boundary spanner, something that provides a focus upon what different sort of local government organisations can focus to sort of understand what they're trying to do. And lastly, I have to have some discussion. So to start to bring this together, so this is a really complicated area, and this is our first attempt to try and start to understand what this means. And I personally found it quite difficult to get there, but we did. But basically, we have quite fragmented and diverse practices of procurement. Because of the sort of the complexity of the public procurement space, but also a question is, to what degree, is this related to the fragmentation of governance and the many sort of different sort of spheres and levels of governance that we have in England. And this, therefore, can pose challenges for trying to synergize the resources that we have with all of these sort of overlapping sort of logics and institutions. Very difficult to, I would argue, move towards a position where there might be some sort of rationalization. I mean, there have been some limited attempts to do that within the new Public Procurement Act, but I would argue that is, although there are some changes, it's very much sort of similar to previous acts and builds on sort of European sort of public procurement arrangements. As I say, that I have seen that procurement arrangements often are shaped by historical ties and geographical proximity. And I think there is a lot of work to be done in the historical sphere. I think that public procurement research needs to do more about the historical origins of how we have got where we are today. I don't know whether I'm the person to do that at my stage in life, but I think it would be a really interesting future project. And despite all of this complexity, what I observed is that there are sort of spaces where practitioners can come together and actually try and be more relational with each other. There are sort of informal collaborations, and where different types of organizational representatives do come together. So there is a way of working around this that I've seen with different partnership and fora. So just coming back again to this, I called it the paradox of social value, and I think this is a key theme about sort of trying to purchase locally versus best value. So this creates, I would say, a paradox that practitioners are trying to fix. They work within a very contractual procurement space, informed by national rules, but that in itself can clash with the relational and social value agenda. So, for example, the solicitor, the lawyer that I was talking to when I was working on this paper, she said that the sort of the contractual rules, it was a bit like David and Goliath. She said that they were the Goliath, and the social value is actually quite weak in terms of legislation in comparison with the bigger contractual legislation. And so this is a key question, and one that we're all struggling with, how we can manage this interplay between national procurement and social value within this space. And so lastly, my last slide is that we need, therefore, I would say, as a public management scholar, I don't really see it at the moment. I think it would be good to try and think more about different public management theories, about how they relate to the different things, the different concepts that I've noted in this space. I think we need more research about institutions, about collaborations. And I'm particularly interested in this mechanisms perspective, about the way that these different agreements can almost be boundary objects. But we continue to have this multi-layered landscape where people tend to use social sort of capital type approaches, in terms of how they bond and link in stronger or weaker ways to help navigate the boundaries that they see. Collaboration is crucial, as I say, for local government neighbours with these strategic and informal groupings. A key theme within the strategies that I read around. And I think, lastly, that I think these mechanisms that I mentioned are really interesting. I think there's something really important there that I'd like to do more about how do these framework agreements, help to integrate the disparate sort of perspectives of the organisations who are purchasing. So here's my conclusion, and I won't go over that because I've said it, but lastly, from what I see, I think there are many different entry points to this problem. One about scale and place, one about institutions, collaborations, mechanisms. And I think that, this would be good for future research. And this is a new area for me. So in terms of research, so I'd welcome any thoughts yourself about any future projects as well. And well, thanks very much for listening.
Yes, thank you very much, Stephen. So we will first do a second short presentation by John, and then we will do all the questions. Yeah,
that's great.
And the question session will not be a part of the published recording then.
Okay.
Right.
Yes.
So everybody, if you have questions, just keep them for another 10 minutes, and then we will proceed with that. Yeah. So I will give now the floor to my colleague John Morris. John is a senior researcher at IOER, previously working at the TU Dresden. He holds a PhD from Loughborough University in the UK. He has been working on the topics of sustainable management of resources, on the role and capacity of local government driving sustainability transformation, and he has a recent research focus on sustainable public procurement, and will share some results from this research with you now.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. So yes, my talk will be on the research that we're currently doing in the Institute. So with the title, The Role of Public Procurement in Promoting Local and Regional Sustainability. So first of all, looking at the potential for public procurement and how it can drive sustainability and sustainability transformations. I think as it's been discussed, public procurement accounts for quite a substantial size of gross domestic product. So in the OECD countries, this is reported to be around 12.5% of GDP. And obviously, with the size of this spending, it can be oriented to addressing societal needs. So as Stephen talked about with social values, so we can see things like job creation, helping with income distribution, generating local economic growth if you are able to use this procurement spend on locally based industries. And what I'm interested in is that there are tensions that arise with using public procurement for pursuing sustainability objectives against the capacities to actually pursue these. And often what we see is that local governments have resource constraints, and they often go for the compliance with the laws, which is you're looking more at keeping costs low. And this could be a missed opportunity for using innovative small and medium-sized companies and instead looking at large companies with economies of scale that have less of a local focus maybe not so interested in the kind of local sustainability agenda. So what are the challenges? With good funding, government procurement departments can identify opportunities where they can intervene in their local areas and use the procurement process. So they could encourage the use of innovative products and processes, support suppliers that are able to provide them, and they can modify the function of the market by introducing criteria for companies to pursue kind of innovative activity, sustainability-oriented activity. But as mentioned, kind of there are like budget cuts, especially like the UK perspective. There's been quite a lot of cuts to resources that are being provided to local governments, and so instead there's more of a focus on value for money in terms of sort of price criteria. So what we end up with is seeing a more off-the-shelf approach, which is low-cost procurement practices, high standardization, not much to tailor to the local environment. So a challenge for authorities in procurement decision making is like, how can we intervene and what capacities can be built within these organizations to have the necessary interventions whilst also complying with procurement laws? So what I've been looking at is doing a review of published research and looking at kind of a semi-systematic review of the literature, looking at where there is overlap between supply chain management literature and literature that's more oriented towards transformative capacities and sustainability transformations. And from my research, I've been analyzing 48 articles that are applicable to public procurement in a more general sense. And what we see is that there are many barriers that are documented in this research to achieving sustainability objectives. So this is that, for example, decisions are made by non-procurement experts. There is a bureaucracy as a barrier for smaller companies to engage in the procurement process. So being able to comply with the requests in the call for tender are beyond the capacities of the companies that are bidding. There's also maybe a lack of adequate measuring and monitoring processes. So it can be sometimes hard to manage contractors once the contracts are in place if they're not specified correctly. And then budget constraints and political priorities that favor implementing tangible outcomes over long-term changes. So being able to measure sort of, what are like the financial savings that are being made from government spending. So my interests then are looking at building capacities in public procurement, and the diagram on the right is from a paper from Viches and Lozano on circularity in public procurement. And here is sort of looking, the top diagram is how things sort of are imagined, that we have kind of the procurer develops some criteria and then engages with the supplier at the sourcing stage. And so we see that there's sort of not really a close relationship. And what they argue is that there should be sort of the procurer and supplier working together at early stages to improve the collaboration between these different organizations. And obviously there's a tension here because there are procurement rules on competition. And so the challenge is, how can we facilitate increased collaboration whilst also maintaining a competitive procurement process? However, with collaboration and helping to develop sort of capacities within organizations and across the supply chain, it is possible that you can develop suppliers to be more sustainable and also develop the institutions that are doing the procuring to have sort of these capacities to measure how effective the procurement process is and to be more strategic in how they implement sustainability objectives. So overall, we kind of summarize capacities within the procurer, how they actually develop screening criteria and what they put in for calls for tender when actually selecting suppliers, and how they develop strategies which can be turned into criteria. And then within the supply chain, looking at kind of capacities for engaging with stakeholders, sharing resources with suppliers, and also looking at kind of repeat procurement with trusted suppliers over against the kind of pressures to have competitive requirements, and where we can find some overlaps between those. From a practical perspective, I'm also interested in what is written in calls for tender. So I will just give an overview of some of the research that is currently underway here. So an example here is circular public procurement, and here you can see a clear role for government procurement departments to identify opportunities to support businesses, processes that would increase circularity within sort of local areas, within companies that are engaging with the public sector. And I was interested in looking at kind of with EU objectives and EU strategies towards circular economy, are calls for tender that are being advertised within the European Union actually encouraging circularity? And what is the outlook for the principles of circularity in public sector objectives? So what we were looking at is from analysis of tender documents from the European Union's database, the Tenders Electronic Daily, and just looking at 2023, which was the last year when we started this research, a keyword term is circular economy and filtering for whether or not this is regional or local government. We got only 89 records of every country in the EU that has to do this. This is for all contracts above 221,000 euros that have to be added, have to be put in this database. So a very small number. And so far we have analyzed 69 of these documents using AI large language models with a series of prompts to identify whether or not circular economy is mentioned and how it is mentioned and how it might be expressed in the criteria. So of all of the tenders, 69 of the 69 that we look at, 26 outline criteria that is not just price. So all the others are just looking at price. And then we also see that within this documents, they kind of have in their description about transitioning to a circular economy, but then there's not really much follow-up on it. So it's more of a nice to have, but it's not really clear how this could be made. So really what we could see is that the EU goals might not be reached if like public sector is not actively supporting the agenda. And really what we're looking at here is we can consider this as a missed opportunity at the moment for public institutions to help fulfill EU mandates on something that's quite large, like circular economy transitions, which needs strong public sector involvement and engagement to drive. So in terms of future work, as well as carrying on this exploration of capacities and looking at empirical data, also in the UK, but also in Germany, I'm also interested in how this can be rolled out. So looking at increased sustainability activity in private sector, how public procurement can contribute to this, criteria that can support regional development. So how can we engage local suppliers? And then also looking at kind of different spatial scales. So I mean, the previous presentation talking about in England, you have small district councils, but also you have sort of large government ministries, how we might have different criteria, how different criteria varies across these. And then considering broader range of years in single countries and identifying how SMEs, local suppliers, and really moving beyond sort of price-based criteria for selecting suppliers in public sector projects. So thank you for the attention, and I am back to Artem for questions and answers.